Hello and welcome to Tales from the Doghouse Separation Anxiety Explained. I am Ness Jones and with me today is...
I am Stacey Bell from Focused Fun in the US. Joining us today, we have a really special guest. Tanya Lim is joining us to talk about getting ready for a baby. I will let Tanya introduce herself, but just real quickly, she is the co-founder and head trainer for Family Pupz, and she does obviously both dog training, but is also a doggy doula. So Tanya, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of arrived at that specialty.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here with you and to talk about this subject, which I think is important, but it can oftentimes be a little bit neglected due to maybe not enough information being provided out there on what we need to be doing. So I'm excited to dive deeper into that. I began my certification journey for training about 5 years ago, and I was really inspired by a fellow trainer who I was looking up to. And actually through her, I found the Family Pupz Parent Education Program. So they're one of the leaders in the market when it comes to dogs and babies and dogs and toddlers. And this is how I learned about dogs and babies and dogs and toddlers. And as I was going through the program, I realized that there is so much lack of knowledge and understanding in the market when it comes to that aspect of dog training, that it really became apparent to me that it can be something that I can help people with, and also help spread more awareness on a larger scheme as much as I possibly can. So with the two, thank you. With the two programs, I was a licensed educator for the last 3 or 4 years. However, with those, I had to do group presentation, and as we all went through the pandemic, we weren't doing many group presentations in person. So my actual private business has really thrived, and this is what I'm focused on nowadays.
Great. We will put your full bio in the show notes, just so people have that. But okay, so talk to us about, can you just define what a doggy doula is in case somebody is not familiar with that terminology?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say that it definitely took us a little bit of time and a little bit of experimentation when it comes to the term that we were using in order to describe our service, because it is pretty unique when it comes to what's being offered out there. So we played around with a few variations of it. And as I was growing my business, I was networking with local doulas, because those are some of the people that people look up to when it comes to finding resources and information. So I felt like a doggy doula could describe to people what I do. However, what ends up happening is it's actually more of a conversation starter, because when I say I'm a doggy doula, people often think that I help dogs give birth, which, I would love to be present at dogs giving birth, but it's not what I do. So I just kind of get the conversation going, and then I can tell them, well, I actually, help prepare. So not only the training aspect, but there are definitely components of, mindset changes and kind of like the overall well-being of the situation that I'm focused on. And I think that with that, I relate to the doula aspect of the medical professionals as well.
Right. Okay, so our list, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I guess I failed to mention exactly what I do as a doggy doula. So I don't help dogs give birth, what I do is I help expecting families prepare their dogs and themselves for the arrival of their baby. So we go through certain phases of, determining, figuring out undesirable behaviors and working on improving those for the families, teaching the dog a certain set of skills that they can be doing so that they can use those skills once the baby arrives. We create different exposures to baby sounds, to equipment, just to make sure that we understand the dog's reactions to those, and then kind of going through the whole process of preparing for the days when the baby comes home, and then also providing support when the baby is home. And we can dive deeper.
Right. No, that's great. So for our listeners, obviously we specialize in separation related behaviors. And so I just wanted to, connect the dots for our listeners in case they're wondering what is going on here? What's connection? We've talked a lot about on this show about how separation related behaviors can be triggered or exacerbated when there's a big routine change, right? So one of the things that we can do to really help mitigate that where we can is to prepare our dogs. So that's where Tanya comes in with her kind of bag of expertise surrounding on how do you prepare a dog for that new family member. So, Ness, do you have anything to add in that part?
No, I'm curious to hear what Tanya's got to say, but Tanya's frozen. We've lost her.
Oh, she is frozen. Well, when she comes back, we have some additional questions for her.
Well, yeah. And we do have another special guest here on my lap, little Bertha.
Hi, Bertha.
She's having cuddles this morning.
So, Tanya, what are your top tips for before the baby's arrival that you work with families on to help prepare the dog?
Mm-hmm. Okay, top tips. I guess the overall theme is let's create as many situations as we can based on what life with a baby will look like and expose the dog to those situations while we still have, the time to focus on the training and are preparing in a way that will put us in a more proactive state versus reactive state. So as I mentioned, it can be really important, especially if we have a good amount of time to really start with things such as behavioral issues. It could be separation anxiety. It could be resource guarding. It could be excessive barking at passersby, because if we're thinking of adding baby to the mix, those are definitely some of the issues that we would like to be on top of as much as possible so that our transition is as stressful as it could, as least stressful as it could be. When it comes to basic skills and manners, I find that things like go to your bed, lay down and stay with duration and distance is definitely a huge staple that I focus on, because I want to keep things simple and I want my families, when they don't know what to do, just go to your bed, lay down and stay. And that can be a bed, it could be a crate. So definitely starting to prepare for the idea of management. So whether the dog is getting used to staying at a crate or behind a baby gate or a separate area, because we know that as the child starts to grow, develop, and change, we're definitely going to be needing management options, and we want to get those started as quickly as possible. I focus on exposures to sound. So babies crying can actually be one of those stressors that I see as a common issue. Typically with newborn babies, it tends to go pretty smooth with some exceptions, but definitely the baby crying can be a big stressor. So I've had people who contacted me after they've had the baby, and it was a situation whenever the baby would cry, the dog would bark. Or some of my clients that we knew that the sounds would be triggering, but obviously we could never know the difference of the dog's response to a YouTube video recorded sound versus the real life thing. But it was similar. When we do diaper changes and baby starts crying, then dog starts to be anxious and starts barking as a result. So we want to do our best to create the exposures. If we're seeing to baby sounds, if we're seeing signs of stress, then we're going to create a training plan so that we can help that dog desensitize or get used to those sounds, so that when the baby comes home, we're not adding a stressor. As I mentioned, we do equipment because some of the baby equipment may make sound and may move in a weird way. So we want to know what the dog does when those are on without having a baby inside. And yeah, so when it comes to then bringing the baby home, my biggest tip is do not leave the baby's carrier on the ground so that the dog can just go and sniff all over them and put their face into the baby's face. I've watched enough YouTube videos of dog meeting a baby for the first time and seen enough examples of how we shouldn't do it. We're always doing everything we can with the information that we have. And I do think that it's important for me to stress that, you know, it's once the baby arrives, it's a period of time where we want to take things slow. We really want to learn about the dog's responses to the baby and just kind of get into a routine before we start to allow more access and more freedom around each other if we feel comfortable with that.
I mentioned with a robust, I mean, it's pretty stressful bringing a baby into the house anyway, but with a confident, robust dog, that's going to be a stressful event. But how do you tackle a dog that's already got underlying anxiety?
Yeah, so when it comes to dogs who have more fear and anxiety, we want to pinpoint what the main triggers are and aim for creating those gradual exposures and building positive associations with those triggers as much as possible, as well as creating spaces where the dog can feel safe. So whether that's a crate, whether that's a certain space within the house, so that if the dog is looking stressed and we feel like the dog needs a break, we can redirect the dog to that area, of course, with a lot of enrichment that the dog can work on, so that we can give them activities that they love. And I find that sometimes if there is a lot going on in the household, it's definitely worth knowing what the local resources are. So, for example, would this dog benefit from, let's say, an extra day or so at daycare so they can have more outlets for their energy and social interactions? Or do we need to have a dog walker who can come and pick the dog up, and just kind of figure out what are the needs, how can we cater to those needs, as well as manage the environment as much as possible so that we can decrease stress due to the changes that are taking place within the home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of those are really good points. But one of the things that I think for dogs that are struggling with separation related behaviors and who are also sensitive to routine changes, one of the things is to think about what life might look like once the baby does come, and then start making those changes gradually, or introducing some of that variety into the dog's schedule, so that it's not like this big, like not only is there this new human who makes new noises and new smells and all of that kind of stuff, but also there's a total shift in our routine. So if there are some of those elements that you can introduce, then I think that's a a good call.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yes.
So do you even work with clients maybe being able to push a stroller and walk their dog, or like, are those the types of skills that you would sometimes add, as well as addressing any fears?
Yes, the stroller is definitely an important part of our training plan, and I definitely missed it earlier when I was describing. So great catch. It can be important to expose dogs, especially if they have sensitivities to movement. Some dogs can be afraid of just like the wheels and kind of like being right by it. So I typically would have the dog on a leash outside, and then we'll introduce the stroller at a distance just to see how the dog reacts, and then to determine whether we need to do an exercise to where we are helping the dog feel more positively about it, and then introduce more movement. But yeah, we definitely walk around the neighborhood. I just want my clients to get a feeling for how are they holding the dog, how are they holding the stroller. A huge tip is to never ever attach the dog's leash to the stroller, because you obviously don't want your dog to lunge towards something, and that wouldn't be safe. And I have found that for my personal services, oftentimes that aspect, depending on what we're seeing from the dog, is one of those contestants to, hey, let me do a day training session where I take the dog, I take the stroller, I just kind of teach the dog what to do, and then get the family in the mix and then coach them on it. And I find that we make a lot more progress. And I'm sure that pretty much any trainer can make this happen for the family as well.
Yeah, it's pretty tricky with separation anxiety cases, because with the stroller, because it's gradual desensitization to ins and outs, time outside the door, and to pack up the baby in a stroller, get it outside, get it back in, get it back. It's not that easy, but anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yes. The separation anxiety training is definitely a commitment to the daily routine, or at least 5 times a week.
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, so common skills that we like to teach families ahead of time: mat training, like you said, go to your mat, lay down and stay there. So mat training, some people call it stationing, the stroller, probably, especially for separation anxiety or dogs who struggle with separation anxiety, maybe having a gate in the baby's room and the parents being able to go into the baby's room without the dog following. Depending on the dog, for some dogs, it might not be a big deal for the dog to go in the room, but for other dogs, we might need a little space there. So teaching skills like that would also be an important one, in addition to addressing any fears or sounds, smells, anything like that that may be triggering for the dog. Ness, can you think of other ones, or Tanya, that might be really important skills for dogs with separation related behavior specifically? And I don't know, I mean, would it be, maybe for some dogs, it might be weird to have the baby carrier in the car when they're in the car too, because like with our separation anxiety clients, a lot of times the dogs come with, right? So if you're going out to dinner, the dog might be coming with, if you're going to a park or something like that. So I guess looking at what your driving situation is like, so if you have your dog in the back seat and that's where the baby carrier is going to be, and you're going to want the dog in the trunk part in a crate, then let's start working on that before the baby comes, I think would be a good call. So I think what you're saying, Tanya, is looking at the dog in front of us and saying, what skills does this dog need to have once the baby comes into the picture, and what behavioral issues do we need to address before the baby comes, and being really proactive in addressing those before the baby comes. Is that in a nutshell sound like a good recap of that portion of our conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because every dog's different, every family is different, and we definitely need to take things case by case, and the things that are easier for this dog to learn or get used to are going to be different than this other dog. And yeah, having that personal approach can make all the difference for that specific family.
Right. So then once the baby's here, what tips do you have for the families in that case?
Yep. So the biggest one, as I referred to a little earlier, was to just take things slow. Take things slow. You have all the time in order to help your dog and baby get used to each other and build a relationship, build a bond as, the baby keeps growing. It's a journey. I always find that it's better to err on the side of caution and take things slow than to think that, hey, the dog has sniffed the baby and now they're best friends, and now, I'm gonna let them hang out while I'm doing this other thing. I don't think that's the best idea. If we take that approach of like, hey, it's a period of time, everybody's learning about, the behaviors that are taking place, about the new routine, and kind of looking at it from that lens can really help us be in a mindset of, hey, this is a journey.
Right. Well, and along those lines, I think it's really important to constantly reassess that, right? Because with a growing human, there might be times in the child's development that are easier or more difficult for your dog, depending on, like, a lot of times I would imagine when they start crawling or when they start walking or, whatever the case is, that sometimes those developmental milestones for the child might provide more difficulty for the dog and or more difficulty for managing the situation.
Yes. If I had $1 for, that saying, if I had $1 for every time that someone contact me that started with, my dog and baby were fine, and now my baby's crawling, and, insert the issue, it is a very common scenario. And that will be another important point to consider. Oftentimes, whether it's, the newborn stage, which is typically a little easier, or the stages that follow, what we want to make sure that is not happening is the accumulation of stressful events. Right. I see that's the main reason for, a lot of the dogs escalating when it comes to like, hey, I need space. Nobody's noticing my communication, my subtle signals, and I'm feeling the need to start to speak louder. So I find that it's really important for new families. We should know that at any stage, but especially when it comes to bringing a new human, like, to learn about dog body language, especially the more subtle signals when it comes to being stressed, and especially when it comes to proximity to that child. So some examples may be lip licks and tongue flicks when being approached or when in proximity. It can be a yawn. It can be a subtle look away, or where you see the whites of the eyes of the dog. It could be subtle shifts in the ears or the tail. It's all situational, but there are definitely more signals that the dog displays before they go into growling that are important for us to start noticing. So whenever I'm working with my clients, I always make a point to show that. Did you see how the dog looked away when, the baby crawled right next to, like, you should be keeping an eye on that. So the body language and preventing accumulation of stressful events is a huge point for the success of that family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, body language is big for us too. We toot that same horn because if you don't know when your dog's stressed, then you can't gradually expose them in a way that's going to teach them that being home alone is safe, or that a child is safe, or that a sound is safe, or whatever the situation is. So we are right there with you, that educating families on body language. And I do find that a lot of people, well, he was licking the baby, or he was, wagging his tail, so it's fine. And a lot of times those signals indicate that the dog is stressed or uncomfortable. And so it's exactly like you said, looking at the full context is super important.
Yeah, it always scares me. Sorry about my dogs; they're playing. That's why if you can hear them. But yeah, it always scares me when you see those YouTube videos or TikTok videos, and the dog is displaying all those signs that it's uncomfortable.
Yes,
everyone's going, "Oh, it's so cute," and you're like, "No, it's not cute. That dog's like this far away from."
Yeah. I have started not looking at those. Because it stresses me out so much. I mean, I just like the whole time I'm like I can feel my whole self getting tense, because you just like in your mind, you're like counting the signals, right? That you see. And it's just, it's heartbreaking for the dog, right? Well, and if anything happens to the child too, obviously, but anyways. Okay. So, Ness, do you have any last minute questions for Tanya?
Not really. No, I think we've hit all the major points. So yeah.
Okay. Tanya, do you have any last minute tips for our audience?
I actually wanted to highlight a point that I think that is oftentimes overlooked as well when it comes to how we develop as humans and how that gets us to behave versus dogs. So for example, you have a young child, children are going to be looking to people or even animals they're wanting to bond with in their eyes, close proximity to their face, which for a dog that may be feeling a little uncomfortable, having that being that is right in front of you and staring you in the eyes can be really scary. We love physical touch, and our dogs love physical touch. However, from people that they know and they're comfortable with, that doesn't mean that is a young child while they're still getting used to. So things like hugging, kissing, those are things that come so natural, and maybe us as the parents or the adults are not even recognizing, but can be so overly stressful to a dog. So kind of considering those aspects of development and how different we are humans from dogs, and kind of recognizing that we don't always need to be face to face. We don't need to be kissing and hugging. We can just kind of, have different types of interactions that may be fun in a different way, like play with a toy, or let's toss this, or let's toss that. Yeah, it's just one of those things. I can share just a quick example for our dog. We had a family friend over, and they had 2 young children. The little girl was 3 years of age, and our dog was sleeping on his bed, and she was going to bed. So then she goes to her mom and she's like, "Oh, can I go give the dog a little hug and kiss for good night?" And the mom goes, "Yes." And I go, "No." Because you need to recognize dog is sleeping, dog is resting. Keep children away from their beds, and especially when they're sleeping and resting, because the dog can just have a snapping reaction that is not their fault. And I mean, there is just so much to spread out there when it comes to information. I don't want to go too much over it, but just a couple examples of things to consider and to look into as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you bring up a good point there, because you said earlier, and I totally agree with this, is that the dog having a safe space, right? Mm-hmm. And so whether that's their bed or a crate or a closet or, whatever that safe place is. I mean, I think that everybody in the household or anybody who interacts with the dog really needs to know the kind of rules that surround that. Like, if that's truly a safe place, that means nobody should bother them when they're in it. Right. And so really just establishing that, I think, is really important. So I really like how you're trying to show parents how to look through that lens a little bit differently from the perspective of the dog and say, hey, but this is different. This is not like kissing a human child when they're sleeping or, putting them to bed or whatever. Also, I wanted to bring up one other thing, is that a lot of times babies are grabby with their hands. And so, when we think, oh, they're going to pet the dog, they actually would grab onto the fur. And depending, like my personal dog, he doesn't like to be pet that much, even by me, who he trusts. And so if I kind of felt bad and said, okay, well, I'm going to let this small child or baby pet him, and they grabbed his fur, it would be aversive that a stranger was petting him, but B, then it hurts too, right? So you really have to think about, advocating for your dog, not only for your dog's welfare, but also for the safety of the child. So really balancing that. And I think in our culture, it can sometimes be really difficult to speak up and be like, no, that's not okay. My dog's not going to enjoy that. So I think it's really important that you're there for them, pointing those things out, maybe even giving them some scripts or words to use so that they can feel comfortable when they feel that kind of pressure, like, eek, I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm not comfortable with it, but I don't know what to do, I
think it's really hard to advocate for your dog though sometimes, because we're coached as we're children, be polite. And that's really hard to, when you become an adult and you become maybe I have to, someone wants to pet my dog, I have to let them. And that's really hard sometimes. Yeah.
I find it's, for me, the hardest situation with Rowan is when a kid walks up nicely and asks nicely, because you want to reinforce that behavior in them, that they're walking up slowly and that they're asking. But for Rowan, that's not okay. He's not comfortable with that. He's not going to lunge and bark at him, but it's not comfortable. So I won't put him in that position. So for kids, I'll try to explain, wouldn't it feel really weird to you, if a stranger came up and hugged you? That's how Rowan feels if somebody he doesn't know pets him. You know what I mean? And try to at least talk through it so they don't just think I'm being mean. So, and so they can gain understanding too. I mean, I think that's really important in setting expectations about dogs in general, that not all of them are going to want to greet everybody.
Yeah, I find it really helpful that even at a young age, we can start to point things out to children, and over time, they can really start to grasp it. Say, hey, when you approach the doggy so fast, did you see how the doggy looked away and licked their lips? That means that they're not comfortable. So next time, let's try this. Or, hey, when you went and you grabbed on the doggy's fur, they did this and that. And now you're starting to point things out to the child, and they can be so observant and they can take in a lot of information. So they can get really good. And I guess that's the other point. It's hey, if your dog is, okay with a lot of things that a child may be doing that may not be okay for some other dogs, we still need to point things out, because what if that was another dog, like your child is at a play date and there is another dog there, and they cannot take this type of approach. So just kind of coaching them and teaching them about the subtle ways that dogs behave can really start to create that effect on children, and they can start to share with their friends and start to build that understanding from a young age. It's totally doable, because once you see it, it can be hard to not see it.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah. So I have one more question for you. When do you think people should seek professional help?
Sure. So when it comes to babies and newborns, it's very rare, but if they feel like their dog is in any way exhibiting any type of prey drive, it could be excessive vocalization when they're looking at the baby, or when in the presence of the baby, or it can be a certain a stare, or it can be a certain response to movements and sounds that the baby makes that comes out with a certain amount of intensity. Again, I stress that's very rare. However, if there is even a doubt about it, I think that should be looked by professional, just to make sure we're keeping everybody safe. Highlighting again, stress, body signals. I want to get stress under control as quickly as possible, because once it starts to accumulate, we start to see the dog escalating in their behavior as well. And I also find that barking, as I mentioned in the beginning, excessive barking can be one of those, nonsense type of, not nonsense, a problem behavior that can be really stressful for the family. It can be stressful when the child is trying to sleep. So kind of getting barking under control can really help for the relationship, I think. And I guess guarding is a final point, because even if the child is stationary as a baby, not too much movement, the dog may have some resource guarding tendencies, but then, a child is growing, we didn't address those, we really need to be on top of it. You have a lot of toys, you have a lot of, resting spots and so on. We don't want to risk that at all.
Yeah. So I think if you are even in a little bit of doubt about whether your dog is prepared for the baby coming, I think being proactive is fabulous. So I love when people, reach out early to trainers to get that support, because I do think having that guidance through a difficult time is super important. But like you said, if you're at all concerned about any of the dog's behaviors, reaching out sooner rather than later is a good call. Okay. So I know that you have a website and you probably have offerings of your own. So is there anything you want to tell our audience about that you have, and let us know what your website is?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Our website is Family Pupz, PUPZ.com. We have our own podcast as well. It's called the Family Pupz Podcast, and we discuss the most commonly requested behavioral and training issues. So we cover a wide range of subjects there. When it comes to offerings, I thought that it will be beneficial for the audience who either is preparing for a baby or lives with a dog and toddler to share the following offerings. So we have a Dogs and Toddlers webinar that goes over management, body language, and everything that, in a summarized way, that a family needs to know in order to prepare for what's to come. So we are going to give $10 off the webinar with Tales from the Doghouse promo code to your listeners.
Oh, that's nice.
Nice. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I actually have one more for the doggy doula for the expecting families, just because, as discussed, things can be a little more personalized. I'm happy to offer any of your listeners who may be in need of some help and support in that. $25 off the initial consultation, and that will be the Tales from the Doghouse 25.
Okay, fabulous. Fabulous. Well, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm sure our listeners will too, particularly if they're preparing for a baby.
Yes. I hope that it was helpful for your audience. For me, it's even if there is one or two takeaways that really stuck out and they can incorporate right away, that is going to be so amazing. So I'm always happy to do that. And it's a subject that we can definitely talk on for much, much longer.
Yes, always. Well, I think you've given our audience a super starting point for, next things to think about and next steps to take. So we appreciate you coming on the show and hope our listeners take advantage of those promo codes.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. It's lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for listening to Tales from the Doghouse, Separation Anxiety Explained. Thank you for watching the show. Hope you got a lot out of it. I am Ness Jones in Australia from Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded.
And I am Stacey Bell from Focused Fun in the US.